Take another photograph and document a life that's right. And ways consist of simple things, the days of black and white. And faces from a humble...
Hello everyone and welcome yet again to Talkin Guff podcast with me, your host, Ruben Django Pouch. That's for all the player haters out there. Haters gonna hate, but haters also watch. Speaking of which, please subscribe to the channel, like the videos, bang out the little notification bell. Mwah, thank you very much. If you do that for me, that would be great. Today is going to be a little recap episode where we sort of touch on a few issues we've talked about before in previous episodes of the podcast and see where they're at now or see how they've developed. So, before we get started, has anyone seen this guy? He's like a Russian bodybuilder. They call him Popeye. He injected like 3 liters of Vaseline into each one of his arms, and he goes around like this. He's a fucking freak of nature. God bless this poor little sausage. He nearly died. They had to go in there and cut it all out. They're gonna have to do a load of surgeries on him. Check him out, bodybuilder Popeye. Ooh. Who told that lad? At what point, what's up with that dude if he thinks that looks good? Because obviously he knows that's not muscle, but he thinks it looks good. Go check this guy out. I'll put a little picture of him here. It's like, fucking hell, man. And so he nearly died from that shit. So don't inject Vaseline into your biceps because it kills the muscles. It can get into your kidneys and all and fucking kill you. So check him out, Popeye. He's a nutcase. So look, let's get right into it. We obviously it's touched before on previous podcasts. I think Macho Man Randy Savage and Indemnify This. We touched on a couple of aspects or a couple of parameters of the coronavirus or the restrictions or the legislation surrounding it, from lockdowns through to vaccine, etc. So we were going to touch on a couple of those points again. And the reason that this came into my head, or the reason I decided to touch on it again, the catalyst, if you will, for me wanting to discuss this situation again, is I was in Centra on the Balcall Road last week, and I was waiting in the queue, and as I'm waiting in the queue, I just looked to my right, and there was the newspaper stand. And I was just checking out some of the headlines, but one story that struck me straight away, and I had to go back and check it out, was an article where Tony Holohan has said that there will be 700,000 cases of coronavirus due to this Delta variant. There will be 700,000 cases of coronavirus in Ireland by September, and 2,000 people will have died. And I'm not going to lie to you, I was really angry when I saw this post or this article, because I just thought to myself, Tony Holohan has, after pulling those numbers out of his arse. That's where he's after pulling those numbers, because nowhere else where that has been affected in the world by the Delta variant, there's no evidence, there's no data to support that projection. Again, we spoke about, because this new Delta variant is more transmissible, and we spoke before about variants in the midst of a lockdown, and we're getting so many variants. Some people will argue that the reason we're getting so many variants in the midst of this pandemic is because of lockdown. These are mutations being selected by the virus, which is much cleverer than us. We're nothing compared to this thing. And so it has selected mutations to combat the adversities of lockdown for it. So there's no people around, it's locked down, so it selects a mutation that makes it more transmissible so it can survive, because that's all it wants to do. It just wants to live. It just wants to survive. It's really clever. And so this is the mutation it has selected to facilitate that survival, if you will. And so that's what it looks like this Delta variant is. And I just had a brief look on the Sky News article, and I'll try to put it up. I think within a certain period of time, and I'm not going to give exact time frame here, but I think it was like 2 weeks, something like that. But in a certain period of time, from the beginning of this Delta variant to whatever this was, 45,000 people in the UK had contracted the Delta variant. And I think 42 people died as a result of that. Well, that's 1 in 1,000. And you're talking 50,000 people in a country of 20 million. You're talking 1 in 1,000 deaths. And yet Tony Holohan saying we in Ireland are going to have 700,000 new cases and 2,000 deaths by September. So again, like, he's pulling that out of his arse. And why would he do that? We spoke again about why this situation would be of an advantage to Tony Holohan. And I'll say it again, I believe Tony Holohan, not necessarily a really calculated or malevolent way, but he's looking even subconsciously for vindication, because he fucked up in a big way. You know, more than fucked up. To say he fucked up means it's almost like this thing that just happened while he was in control of the situation, an accident, if you will. But he knew, as we've discussed before, that women had a certain congenital issue that would potentially put them in danger of contracting or like developing cancer. He decided not to tell those women when their results come back as in fact positive, that they did in fact have potential problems in their midst. He didn't tell those people, and 10% of those women died. And we've discussed this before, and that's a fact. That's not a conspiracy theory. And there is a tribunal waiting for Tony Holohan that has been kicked down the road as a result of coronavirus restrictions and lockdown. And so I just think, that's what his history is. Like, for me, he broke his Hippocratic oath. And yet we're going to put him in a position where he gets to dictate to everyone, where he is the gospel when it comes to sort of medical advice or what we should do in the midst of this situation. And I just don't buy it. I'm not into him. I think he's an asshole. So as a direct result of Tony Holohan's situation, we've decided not to reopen indoor dining on the 5th of July. We're the only country in Europe that is not indoor dining at the moment, and we haven't had the same numbers and deaths that they've had in other countries that have allow indoor dining at the moment. In the UK, where they had this apparently devastating variant that we have to be so careful of, or we're going to have 700,000 new cases and 2,000 deaths, in the UK, where this is going on in real time, where they're actually suffering from this situation, the fucking Euros are going on. There's 40,000 people in Wembley Stadium, like, multiple times over the last 2 weeks. And we're supposed to what? Destroy our livelihoods when that's the evidence, that's the data. We're meant to just kick everyone's livelihood, kick all their suffering down the road. Because here's the thing that Tony Holohan doesn't understand, because he's probably worth a load of money. He probably has a nice gaff that it's nice and easy to stay in. Turns out Tony Holohan is actually worth about, he's getting paid about 200 G's, just under 200 G's a year, basic, for his position as Chief Medical Officer. And God knows, you know, what other money has been made and is still being made over the years. And while I was at it, I saw that Ronan Glynn is on about 125,000. But CEO of the HSE, I don't even know how the HSE, the Health Service Executive, has a CEO, a Chief Executive Officer. Usually I thought that's a title or position held for, you know, Fortune 500 companies and shit like this. But this guy is the CEO of the HSE, Paul Reid. He's currently earning a salary of 358,000. But with allowances, Mr. Reid's total remuneration comes to a whopping 426 grand a year. Scumbags. He doesn't even have to stay in. It's not the same. We've discussed before how we're not all in this together. And Tony Holohan is certainly not in the same position as some, working class individuals whose businesses are faltering, or who have lost their jobs through redundancy, probably by a company who's being subsidized by the government at the same time. Like, this shit is happening. So for me, it's easy for Tony Holohan to go, oh, look, we'll just wait another month. There are leases. There are people taking leases. There are people who have bought stock, hired staff back, got insurance, all of the above, just to be told, no, you can't do that. Even though everyone else in Europe is doing it, you can't do it. And the reason you can't is because of the thing that they're suffering at the moment. It's like, they're not doing it. They're not doing what you're asking of us, even though they're in the midst of what you're saying we have to be careful from. Again, I'm not arguing the validity of coronavirus or anything like that. It's not really part of the conversation. I'm more sort of discussing, I don't think lockdowns work because it just creates variants, and this virus is going to get wherever it's going to get because it has selected mutations to survive. It's much cleverer than us. And so I just think that that's really frustrating. That's really upsetting and really annoying. And it's a policy that is being dictated by a distorted human being who doesn't have to live in the world that the members of the lowest rungs of society have to live in. He doesn't have to live in our world. So of course it's easy for him to make this policy or to suggest this policy. It was Neffet who also said that we should have a vaccine passport for indoor dining. And we'll touch on that now in a minute. People are on their knees, and I'm really feeling it at the moment. If I'm being honest with you, I'm so depressed. I'm so sick of this situation, and I'm blessed. I have it way better than people even in this town. And so I couldn't begin to imagine what it's like if I'd lost my business, if a partner of mine had committed suicide, if the company that I worked for had made everyone redundant while still being subsidised by the government. And the people who are on their knees, it's not the super wealthy, it's local business, stuff like that, like normal everyday people. And local business is the most important business we have. Like, centralised power and wealth is a bad thing. We want localised economies, localised business, localised politics. That's the future. And that's what's suffering in the midst of all this. The great transfer of wealth has only highlighted the fact that big business is going to prosper no matter what. But these legislations, these restrictions are killing normal everyday people, literally, not figuratively. And it has to stop. It's not good enough. Things are bad enough. Like I said, there are companies, businesses out there in the service industry who have taken on leases, who have taken on staff, who've taken on stock, insurance, other costs, other situations. And now they're being told, sort of ambiguously, no, until when? There's talk that this newest lockdown or the restriction on indoor dining could go on till September. But there's a place in town, and there's no doubt hundreds, if not thousands of stories just like this. But Talkin in town, which is a really popular pub, bar, restaurant that had old school Neo Geo fucking arcade machines and stuff like this. Great spot. And they're hanging on. They're literally hanging on for dear life. There was just an article about them there, and I can't remember, and I'll put it up here. Pop. But those lads are hanging on for dear life. And this final 2 weeks to maybe 2 months could be the final nail in the coffin. And people who make the policy don't seem to understand that. Or how could they not understand that? And so if they do understand it, do they just not give a fuck? Is it just sort of fodder? Collateral damage? As long as X, Y, and Z survives, that's all that fucking matters. Again, we spoke about the priorities of our government and where they lie, and it's not with us. So why would this be sort of arm of policy be any different? They don't give a fuck. That's what it looks like. I think that everyone, especially in Brian, if someone else said this to me and I was just like, that's fucking where it's at. I think everyone should just open in solidarity. All local businesses and small restaurants, bars, etc. should come together in solidarity and just open. What could they actually do? We own this country. We own the roads. We own everything. It's us. We own the government. They're elected by us. They're meant to protect and serve us. They're meant to govern us. And so what could they actually do if we, the people, decided, no, we're opening up? And that is that. At the moment, and I know this to be a fact, there is a hotel in Bray that right now at the moment has 200 residents. It's 200 people booked into the hotel. Right? Those 200 people are allowed to sit inside and drink and dine all day, every day. Not breaking the rules. No one's breaking the rules here. That's just ridiculous. What a juxtaposition, or what a fucking total contradiction. And how do we expect people to observe that and go, okay, right, yeah, I'll just let my business go to shit and falter and waver while it's a total different story for these businesses. It doesn't make sense. I will adhere to coronavirus restrictions and government guidelines, but those people don't have to, and I'm not blaming them, I'm blaming the policy. It's totally fucked up. It's a total shit show. Just like Tony Holohan and the 700,000 blah blah blah. Everyone's making this shit up as they go along. That's what it seems like to me. And it just seems like there's no resistance to that. I suppose I would like to see some resistance to that. I would like to see someone stand up and go, sorry, Tony, where's the evidence for that? Where did you get your projections? Are these the same projections that told us like we're going to have however many it was back in March of 2020, where it's going to be like, oh, we'll have 1 million deaths and all that? Like, is it the same projections? And if like, why are we doing this? Why are we listening to these people when we know from the last year that they talk out of their arses? And Tony Holohan has picked that little nugget right from between his arse. And I, for one, I'm sick of it. I just cannot stand that guy. I'm sorry. I can't stand him. And I think, like I said, everyone should tell him to fuck off and we're just open. They couldn't do anything. Because the other side of it is, like I've discussed, there's 200 people in a hotel in Bray now. There's also thousands of people just walking the streets everywhere you go. It seems totally ridiculous that we're even entertaining a conversation about social distancing and, lockdowns and this sort of stuff when it's not actually happening out there. And I don't think necessarily people are breaking the rules. It's just like the Gardaí don't even probably know what to enforce at this stage. It's totally bonkers. It's a shambles. Total shambles, and it's now only serving to sort of cripple local business and ordinary working class people. That's the only people that this is having a hardcore negative effect on now. That's it. And our government seems to think that that's okay, that that's not a problem. And I think we should show a serious amount of resistance to that, to their narrative, to their ideologue. It's out. These guys have to fucking go. Like, they're done. One thing that I thought was interesting, I said already that there was a talk of, and it was Neffet who had spoken, and it's only like 3 days after, I can't remember what minister was saying, no, we'd never allowed sort of vaccine bonuses or vaccine passport for local business and internal situations like pubs, gigs, etc. We would never allow that. Then on Monday, the following Monday, I think that was on the Friday, on the following Monday, Neffet are sort of going, yeah, no, we want this. We want a vaccine passport for indoor dining. We want to only allow the vaccinated to enjoy the trappings of life, basically. Because that's one thing I've said before, is this is some sort of weird half-life. Like, you can't go to festivals and gigs and touch people and kiss them all. You can go to work. You can pay your rent, you can be evicted. All of that stuff still exists. But just like what used to make it bearable for a lot of people, out. And then we'll just repackage it in this sort of nanny culture, sterilised way. Speaking of which, there was a gig there in Kilmainham. And they're like, and it was the beautiful Denise Chyla was playing. Mwah. The beautiful and talented, super talented Denise Chyla, should I say, whom I love to bits. She was playing along with other people, obviously, at the Kilmainham. It was a pilot gig. And I have already discussed, I'm not into these pilot gigs. I don't want to figure out a way to work within the remit. I want to figure out a way to get the remit back to what it was. Because here's another thing. No one can make money from these pilot gigs. No one. Maybe MCD can. But apart from that, no one is making money. It's all, I guarantee you, sold to the lighting technicians and the acts and everyone involved. Is like, oh, this is the pilot thing, so it's going to be not very much money in it. And because there's no money to be generated from it. Like, the margins were small enough anyway, I assume. And now it's like, oh yeah, but sure, you can do it with 50% capacity, can't you? It's like, no, we can't. Like, let's be real here. And so I think of them as lip service. It's sort of a way to kowtow to the entertainment industry who's on its fucking knees. It's just like, no, here's a way out. It's just like, it's not a way out. That is lip service, and that is not going to help in the long run. It might feel good, and it might be great for those performing artists to go out and perform, and more power to them. That's great. As someone who used to play gigs myself, I understand the power and attraction of that situation, and so I really am happy for those performing artists, because that's, for the most part, what they live for. But if they don't get any fucking money, they can't live. And then a guy I know posted a picture on Instagram. How would I find it? It was a picture from the Kilmainham gig, and give me 2 seconds, I'm going to find it, right? It said, there was a picture, and I'll put it up on the thing, right? But there was this poster that's, and it's by the Department of Tourism, Culture, and it says, please use social media to tell the world you're having a great time, #pilot event. Like, if that's not classic Bill Hicks, like, go back to sleep, America, everything's okay, please use social media to tell the world you're having a great time. Fucking fuck off. We're not having a great time. It's an okay time. It's a nuance of what we used to enjoy to do on a regular basis. It's not a good time. It's a nuance of a good time. And that they would even put that up. It's like, what? I just thought that was mental. So we spoke before there, or just a minute ago, I said that there was a situation where 45,000 people had contracted the Delta variant, or 45,000 people had contracted coronavirus in the UK. I think 90% of them were the Delta variant, and of that, 42 people died, which is about 1 in 1,000 we discussed. What was a really interesting part of that is that 19 of those 43 people, which is about 40%, I would say, who died from coronavirus in that period of time were vaccinated. Right? And again, I'm all for people taking the vaccine as they wish, but I'm also all for me being able to not take the vaccine. And I said before that a guy I was looking at online who was totally poo-pooed and slandered and made to look like a crazy person, he was making the point that when you administer vaccines in the midst of a pandemic that has variants, that you could run into trouble, because the vaccine has been modeled or created or developed off a protein spike. And if the protein spike changes in the variant, then your vaccine won't necessarily be effective. And I thought then that maybe that situation where 40% of the people who died from this new Delta variant had been vaccinated, that could potentially be evidence to support that theory. And certainly something worth having a look about, or worth having a little chat about. I won't go too much on about the vaccine, because I did talk a lot about my opinion on it in the Indemnify This episode, and I think everyone's opinion, everyone's perspective or truth is valid for them and should be respected, especially when it comes to issues of sort of body autonomy. Sorry, one thing I didn't say earlier is that in the midst of that vaccine passport proposal, local businesses came out in their droves and said, no, we refuse to ask people, or, you know, to sort of police or enforce that part of legislation. If it were to become legislation, we won't enforce it. And I thought that was brilliant. I love to see that. That's a real solidarity. It's real awareness of the potential of a two-tier society, and people are saying no to that. So that's brilliant. That's a little. It actually makes me really happy. Not because I think it's a victory for me and my ideals, but just because it means that there is a safe space for everyone. Isn't that brilliant? Like, that's what I want. That's all I want. And so it's great to see that. Anyway, hey, so I just had to jump back in after the fact whilst I was editing the current episode, because there was a development with one of the topics. And we're speaking in this current podcast about indoor dining and a vaccine passport situation. And that is what is going to happen now, 100%. Somewhere between the 19th and the 26th of July, pubs and restaurants will be open for indoor dining for vaccinated people only, or vaccinated people and some other, if you've recovered from coronavirus in the last 9 months, I think it was, but that's it. No PCR test heads allowed, and even at that. And so I'm really disheartened and upset about that situation. Like I've already said in this episode, there's 200 people, you know, in just one case in this town of a hotel that has 200 people in it, and they're not vaccinated necessarily, indoor dining and drinking, etc. And so will that still be the case where after the whatever, sometime between the 19th and the 26th of July, will those people still be able to dine and drink indoors if they're not vaccinated because they're residents of a hotel? So like just even the sort of juxtaposition of the legislation, and maybe I could be wrong about this, but like just say for instance that you wouldn't be able to, if you were not vaccinated, you wouldn't be able to go eat or drink inside. But if you go and rent a hotel room, you can. And so the other thing is that, like, from so far, I haven't seen that you will have to have said vaccine certificate to work in any of these establishments, and I couldn't imagine that they do that. So then, if you don't have a vaccine, you can't eat or drink indoors, but you can work and serve food and drink indoors. If you don't have a vaccine, you have to sit outside, but you can go inside to use the lavatory. So, like, I mean, there are just a few instances, in my opinion, of how the legislation could potentially be at odds with itself. And so that's one little part of it. And another part of it, I suppose, is just socially. I just really think that, and you could get melodramatic about this, or, you know, or maybe, but you could say that it's like medical apartheid. It's not mandated yet, but you're definitely being coerced then. Because I don't want to get the vaccine, and so I can't go to gigs, which is one of my favourite things to do. It's one thing I've been waiting to go and do for a long time, and just like, no, you can't do that, mate. Sorry, because you won't take this vaccine / prophylactic. And I just think that that's definitely not a place we want to be as a society or socially. And people already are just like, well, just don't be a spa, just get it. And I'm like, well, what if I was just like, you know, don't be a spa, just don't abort your baby. Or, you know, or no, I'm going to have to cut that out, obviously. But you know what I mean? If I was like, just don't be a spa, just take, what is even that mean? And where have we come from? You know, because you're not really allowed to coerce people into taking medication. Or, you know what I mean? And it'll be like, people will be like, it's not a medicine, it's a vaccine, and etc., etc., etc. It's just like, it's so unfair that it's even, that it's happening, you know? It's like, for anyone out there who doesn't want to be vaccinated, they can't enjoy the trappings or the same luxuries as other people within the same society. Is that not totally dodgy? Do people not understand how that's totally not a thing that's acceptable? Like, do I get a tax exemption because I can't go to the pub or go to a restaurant and eat inside or enjoy other luxuries? Will I not be able to go to the cinema? Like, what are we talking about here? And it's totally no one else's business what someone does with their body, what vaccines or medicines they agree or don't agree to take. It has nothing to do with anyone else. And yet you're going to have to surrender that information every time you want to go for a drink or a meal or to the cinema and stuff. I don't know what the story with that is, in fairness. It just seems so ridiculous and crazy. And another thing that's going to come up is there's people aren't going to police this situation. The guards aren't going to police it, and people who own certain businesses and restaurants won't police it. And it's just like, why would, and they know that, and so what's the point of even doing it? And these emergency legislations, you're always left with a little residual bit. And what if, like, I just think it's really it's really dangerous and potentially scary for me, in my perspective, my truth, you know, where we're going with this. And mandated medicines is not a thing I want to see happen. And I think potentially this could be the first little step. Like I said previously, and like, take all my rhetoric aside and just like, I'm just trying to be totally honest with you. I said before that it's fine to take the vaccine if that's your choice or prerogative, and there should be a safe place for your choice, but just as equally, there should be a safe place for me and my choice not to take the vaccine. And now it seems like that's not the case. You're going to be denied some of the freedoms of day-to-day life, and I just think that's really shit. It's shit for the people who it affects now, but I think it's a stepping stone to allowing legislation to control, you know, you more. It's more centralised control. And so what you think might seem like an innocuous thing could potentially lead to sort of more
mandated legislation that is not in your favour, and so beware. Back to the original recording.
One thing I will say just quickly, and I won't bang on too much about the vaccine and that sort of stuff, because I have spoke about it before at length and made my opinion and my stance really obvious. And that's just me. And you can be you, and it's cool beans. I got friends, like I said, my mum's been vaccinated. I have friends now getting vaccinated, and it's all cool. I'm really happy for that situation. But one thing I noticed, I spoke before about pandemics, the swine flu jab, which was administered in this country and ended up having an adverse effect on a percentage of people. And that manifested in the development of narcolepsy and cataplexy, which is brain damage effectively. But in 2019, I remember reading this article in 2019, funny enough, and then I forgot about it, or a weird thing happened. Basically, when we started to see last year that people were successfully suing the pandemics vaccine, the state basically, because I'm pretty sure that the company GlaxoSmithKline, who are dodgy bastards, they were indemnified by the government, which seems to be the protocol or the trend for this situation, which is mind-boggling to me. I've discussed it before. Mystery can of piss. When the first articles of this situation started coming out last year, it said, and I'm just going to recap on it real quickly here. This is one of the articles that came out this year and sort of last year. There was 2 or 3 of them, and it said 16-year-old boy who claimed he developed sleep disorder after swine flu jab settles action for 900,000. That groundbreaking settlement paved the way for the resolution of 80 cases over the pandemics vaccine. So they're saying that this case paved the way. And I remember when I read that this article, I was thinking, that's weird, because I'm pretty sure I read an article a year or 2 ago that the same article, or same situation, but a girl who had developed narcolepsy and cataplexy as a result of getting the swine flu jab had sued the state. But then it's sort of saying that this is the groundbreaking case, like this is the first one, this is the precedent almost. But I just briefly thought that, but then I found that original article again, and part of it really hit home, because this is an article from 2019. Narcolepsy case raises important questions about vaccine approval. And this is in 2019, the year previous, obviously, to coronavirus and the pandemic, and then the rushed rollout of this new vaccine. And it's funny because I said before, or it's not funny actually, but I said before that this is one of the only times where we administered a rushed vaccine in this country and it had negative effects. And that for me was sort of important to understand or to be aware of, because we did do this before. We did rush a vaccine before. We did administer like stage 3 vaccines before, and they had a negative effect on a percentage of people, gave them brain damage, and that has ruined their lives. And that's also going to cost you, through the state, it's going to cost you and me hundreds of millions of euros. And that's not a conspiracy theory, that's a fact actually. And then in the Irish Times, 2 years ago, we see a headline like that, where the narcolepsy case raises important questions about vaccine approval. And in this article, they go on to say, how using rushed stage 3 vaccines is a very, something we need to be wary of. And we know that because it had a negative effect on X amount of people. And then the following year, it's as if that article never happened. And that's like, you could be going way conspiracy theory on this, but it's just like, why would they say in the 2020 and 2021 articles that this was the precedent, this was the landmark case, this was the breakthrough, when we know that a girl had settled out of court, or from now speaking to the media on living for settled her case in the High Court. We know that happened in 2019, but it's almost as if, because the article tied to this 2019 situation is, this is a bad thing. We don't want to do this. There are concerns around rushed vaccines, but then it's just gone. Don't listen to that. Now listen to this narrative. So within the space of a year, the Irish Times changed its narrative like 180 degrees. And what was concerning in 2019 is like conspiracy theory stuff in 2020, 2021. You know, oh, don't listen to what we said 2 years ago. And if you do, you're a nutcase, tinfoil hat wearing fruitcake. So I thought that was a weird turnaround and interesting. Look, we're going to move on from those couple of issues or from those points of topic, and we're going to move into a potentially contentious subject. We're going to talk a bit about transgender athletes, and we touched on this subject before, and I won't lie to you, the episode in which we touched on it has since been taken down. It was a conversation that me and Led had. So it was taken down after a conversation that me and Len had. I'm not into that, really, personally, self-censoring. And I didn't think what was said was wrong or transphobic for definite. Definitely it was heavy-handed. But on my part, it wasn't heavy-handed on Len's part. But the point he was making was, I was a bit heavy-handed about it, but he couldn't really disagree with the crux of what my argument, but he didn't want to be sort of complicit with my heavy-handedness. And I agree, or I understand where he's coming from, so we took it down. I think I said something like, look at the jaw on your one, effectively. I don't want to offend anyone, but I do find the subject of trans athletes to be fascinating, and I would love to know what people think about this situation, especially women, actually, because I hadn't thought about this subject really for a while, and then I saw an opinion piece or whatever from someone who had sent it into the Irish Times, and I just saw and I read it, and I'm going to read it to you. This is what made me think about the situation again, or want to talk about it again, or touch on it, and I'm going to read the letter, and I would like to know what people's opinions are. And so I'll read it first. Sir Johnny Waterson's comments that we've been trying to educate ourselves this week by listening to sports scientist Ross Tucker. Issue of transgender athletes see rights on safety and inclusion collide. Sports, June 25th. Are welcome, but women have been citing Tucker for a while now. This is not news to us. I would appeal to Waterson to please call us what we are. Women, not cisgender women. We are not a subcategory of the female sex. The rights of a vulnerable transgender athlete who also has the rights to not face discrimination ignores the fact that this displaces the rights of women, like, and I'm really sorry if I get the name wrong here, Kuanini Nini Manumua, the 21-year-old female weightlifter from New Zealand who would have been participating in her first Olympics had she not been displaced by the 43-year-old Laurel Hubbard who was born male. It's really not complicated. World Rugby has set out the science very clearly, and even with testosterone suppression, men don't lose their considerable physical advantages over women. Yours, etc. Jill Nesbitt in Bray, in County Wicklow, like ourselves. So, I would like to know, Jill there raises a couple of points. And I don't know, it's because we're in such a funny period in history, or a funny time, socially speaking, that I'm looking at that going, yeah, of course, that makes total sense. What Jill is saying, it makes total sense, because the reality of it is that men have physiological advantages when it comes to sports, I suppose. I'm not a big sportsman myself now, so I don't have these physiological advantages. All right, well, look, no. Like, we're bigger. We have a bigger bone density, bigger hearts, bigger lung capacity. We have physiological advantages. And I just don't really think that that's up for debate. But then again, I'd like to... So one of the points being made is that then women's rights, cisgender or whatever, I don't know how to... I'm really trying my best to traverse this without offending anyone, but she's saying that, you know, cisgender females or biological females are being displaced. Their rights are not being accounted for in the midst of this situation. And she touches on the situation in New Zealand. Now, as far as I understand it, Laurel Hubbard, who was biologically born a male and is transitioned into a female, more power to Laurel, no problem. But Laurel Hubbard is now going to be, at 43 years of age, the weightlifting Olympian for New Zealand, female Olympian for New Zealand. I just find it crazy, you know. And then there's a handball player, an Australian handball player in the AFL, wants to play in women's professional AFL, called Hannah Mounsey in Australia. And again, it's just like, it's obvious when you just look at Hannah that she has serious physiological advantages over her opponents. You know, some of the photos look photoshopped. And so I just was wondering what women's take on that was. It's just like, do you feel that this situation is displacing the hard work, etc., of biological females or cisgender females? Or do you think it's just all hullabaloo about nothing? How do we deal with this situation? Please comment in the comment section below. Like, do people just get over it, or like not do people get over, but should transitioned females be allowed to compete? You know, should biological males who have transitioned into females be allowed to compete in female sports? Is it unfair that they do? You know, all of these questions I'd love to know the answers to, because there's and this is going to sort of touch on two. So this part is going to, and this sort of brought it up for me again. I saw the letter, and then a couple of days later I saw this video that I'm going to talk about now, and that sort of brought the whole thing up to me. But there's a woman, like a politician in the States, I think in the state of Ohio, who was looking for a bill amendment which would effectively ban biological males, like transition females, from competing in female sports. And she references like multiple women throughout the US who are losing out on education, scholarships, etc., 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 to trans females, you know. And I'm going to be honest with you, I think it is a bit unfair. I do, because there are physiological advantages, and if I had a daughter who had trained her whole life at something and was set to be the next Olympic powerlifting, you know, candidate or Olympian, whatever the fuck you say, and she gets pipped by trans female with like Laurel Hubbard or Hannah Mounsey with huge physiological advantages in spite of like, and hormones, the type of physiological advantages that hormone suppression won't have enough of a dampener on. I do think that's a bit unfair, and I think, like I said, if I had a daughter in that situation, I would feel like she had been hard done by. And people might argue, well, then just as equally, the trans person who is not allowed to compete might feel hard done by. And yeah, I don't think it's the same. I think then that maybe we should have a trans female category for biological males who have transitioned to female. There should be a trans female character just based purely on the physiological advantages, how that would be safer and fairer and a more obvious way to do things. And again, when we talked about this previously, one thing that I found and I thought was a real strange double standard or contradiction was that there is an American wrestler, trans male American wrestler who was born a woman, transitioned to a male, and is a like fucking NCAA wrestler or whatever. They make that guy fight other women. They make that trans male fight cisgender women. And I thought that was mad. And because a lot of the time it's probably males making this policy, and they've decided that it's all right for trans female, you know, born male with massive physiological advantages to compete physically against women. But it's not all right for a trans male to compete against males. That seems strange to me, no? Or total double standard anyway, for definite. Look, like I said, it's obviously a totally contentious subject or topic, but it's one that surely conversation has to be allowed to be had around, and we have to be realistic and employ the science of the situation and not sort of allow our emotions or anything like that to run away with the situation. Like I said, sorry, I've started waffling there. There's a video I saw in the States, a local government building, where they're trying to pass an amendment to a bill, and the Republican politician in the States is trying to, amend a bill surrounding this situation and make it against the rules in the state of Ohio for transition females to compete against cisgender females in sports. But one thing, and this sort of segues us into, from a recap perspective, into episode 2, the left versus the right thing, is that one thing that happens in the midst of this bill amendment is that the Democrats in this government building, the state government building, whatever the fuck it is, start literally screaming and banging stuff off the tables. And
across our country, female athletes are currently losing scholarships, opportunities, medals, education, and training opportunities. This amendment will require schools that are part of the OHSAA to designate separate teams for participants of the biological sex. No school interscholastic conference or organization that regulates...
It's just... And I don't know, like, they don't want... Your one is trying to talk about the amendment to the bill and put forward whatever it is she has to put forward, and the Democrats are like, nah! Like, just as, like, acting like fucking children. And I mean, they're the upper echelons of the society. They're the policymakers. They're the people who are meant to be, like, not allow emotion into the situation, or to, coolly and collectively discuss policy that is going to be for the greater good or to the detriment of local people. And they just start screaming, like, not even at her, just like, la 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 la. And that, for me, is a sort of perfect microcosm or encapsulation of the whole problem. If that's the way the people at the top are conducting themselves when it comes to creating policy, how do they expect normal, everyday people to treat each other? La 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 la, no, you're an asshole, no, you're an asshole, no, you're an asshole. And so I just thought straight away that's totally fucked up. Like, you're politicians, and obviously we know politicians for the most part are scumbags, but you're acting like children. You're not even pretending anymore. Because here's another interesting part of it. It has absolutely nothing to do with the policy. Nothing. They don't give a fuck. The Democrats don't give a fuck about the rights of transgender female athletes. All they want to do is fucking go la 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 to the Republicans. That's how fucking retarded they've become. I spoke before about this sort of inverted, mirrored, short, like, close-mindedness and ignorance. How the left has become this. And there it is, in plain sight. There's the Democrats going, like I said, they don't give a fuck. All it is political capital. They just want to be seen to be opposing the Republicans in any way they can see fit. They're just exactly the same as the Republicans. We should sort of make a point. Let's just make the point that they're exactly the same as the Republicans. Joe Biden, who's a Democrat, is a crazy person. He's a crazy, interventionist, fucking war criminal who is bombing the shit out of Middle Eastern brown countries right now. So they don't give a fuck. It's only about political capital for these motherfuckers. And there it is, right? It's just like, it's totally ridiculous. Like, land of the free, home of the brave. When are they going to implode? And, well, I suppose that'll have a really bad effect on the rest of the world. I just thought that was crazy, and it segues us into that left-right thing and how we're just totally the death of conversation. There it is right there, in the place where they're meant to mediate and converse and create policy. Just like, la 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 la, no. It was mental. Check it out. Maybe I'll put it up. It's just totally insane. What a bizarre time we live in general. It's like the hedonistic genesis of our own downfall is sort of playing out around us. It's total Hunger Games stuff. Anyway, let us know what you think. Would the women give me a shout out and let me know what their take on the situation is. We'll talk about it maybe again. All right? Another little recapper, another thing we're going to touch on that we've discussed before on the podcast is Free Britney, bitch. Wow. I mean, what a fucking bombshell. We spoke about the Britney Spears situation, her conservatorship, a good while ago, while Len was still with us, before Len died of coronavirus. We discussed the Britney situation. It was right after the Free Britney documentary, or what's not called that, but the Britney Spears documentary came out. And we had said back then how mental this whole thing seemed, the conservatorship, but there was a whole load of ambiguity surrounding the situation because she was not a person who was against it, as we could see. And in fact, she had put out press releases saying that the documentary upset her and all of this, and she was happy and everything was fine, and multiple sort of situations like that. So that was sort of her stance or her take at the time. And again, I said before that would sort of be my worst nightmare. It's just like, no, Ruben, you're crazy. Just, we'll look after you. Of course you have to do this thing. You're crazy, Ruben. You can't look after yourself. You can't have your money. You have to do what we say, Ruben. You're crazy. Like, that would really get me. I can almost see that happening to me. Although I have no money. But just the people where, the bit where people are like, you're crazy. Like, imagine how difficult that would be for you personally if someone was playing you like that, if you were being manipulated like that, because it would be awful. You'd be second guessing yourself the whole time. You're like, am I crazy? I suppose what they're saying makes sense. You know, it would be awful. It'd be the worst. And like I said, the ambiguity sort of around the whole thing was that Britney, we didn't hear anything from Britney. No one knew Britney's opinion or her stance on the situation. In fact, if anything, she would have said, no, it's grand, just shut up, will you? And then, sometime last week, we hear this courtroom testimony from Britney Spears, right? And it was fucking sensational. It was unbelievable. The stuff that she said, the way she was saying it, her new stance, how she was dealing with the situation, the whole thing was fucking mental. Straight away you notice something. Straight away you notice that this woman is speaking in a way that we haven't seen before. On TikTok, she speaks at this little Disney Channel kid's voice, and it and funny enough, who else did that? What traumatized superstar did that? That's right, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson didn't talk like that. Michael Jackson had a deep voice like that. Yo, what's up, man? That was Michael Jackson. And so Britney Spears so we know now she puts on that voice, and there are people who say that's some sort of defense mechanism to the situation. I don't really understand that part of it. But anyway, that's the first thing you sort of notice. This is sort of like a woman.
I will be honest with you, I haven't been back to court in a long time because I don't think I was heard on any level when I came to court the last time.
This is a woman who knows what she's talking about, and she wants to talk about it. And that's not to say that in parts of it she's not a little bit all over the place. But again, if someone had been telling you for however many years that you're crazy, that's bound to seep into what you think about yourself and be playing on you the whole time, especially in a situation where you're trying desperately to communicate how shitty this situation is and how it's just, you can't stand for it anymore. The anxiety level must be through the roof, and it must play in. Like I said, she does get a bit all over the place at parts of it, but not like incoherent or mumbling mess. Just she loses her way a couple of times in it. But one thing that's quite obvious throughout the whole situation is that this is a different woman. This is the real Britney Spears. This is what she sounds like. This is how she thinks. And obviously there were some fucking bombs dropped by Britney Spears. First of all, she's saying that she was forced to do a tour for however many years, and then when a new tour came up for 2018, she didn't want to do it. But she was literally strong-armed, like the whole time. Yeah, and she didn't want to do it. One thing that comes up consistently is that when the management company doesn't get their way, when she wants to say no, and like you're talking about, she's the star. She's the moneymaker. She's the thing, the product. But when the management company aren't happy with her, they like ring her therapist and stuff. They basically accuse her of not cooperating, not taking her medication, this sort of stuff. And sort of thing that's hanging over her head the whole time is like, play the fucking game or you don't see your kids, you don't go on your holiday to Maui. Literally, we're going to fuck your life up, right? So she's coming off this tour and they ask her to do a Vegas residency again. Apparently she's been doing residencies in Vegas for years. Like, and serious money is being generated off these shows. Money that she doesn't even own. And so she says no, or they say to her, the management company, just turn around and say, look, if you don't want to do the Vegas show, you don't have to do the Vegas show. Fair enough. And she even said that she said to her assistant that she felt like she didn't want to do it, but she felt like when she says no, that they're going to come back twice as hard. Like they're feigning sort of compassion or altruism and they're saying, look, if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. But she feels that when she says no, because she doesn't want to do it, that they're going to fucking do her in, right? She says no. Literally the next day, her psychiatrist brings her in, sits her down, says, look, Britney, I've had a million phone calls that you're not cooperating, you're not taking your meds, that you're not blah, blah, blah. All of which apparently are erroneous. And the next day, he takes her off her medication that she's been on for 5 years and puts her on lithium. Now, I have had friends of mine who have had serious mental health issues, even to the point where they had mental illness. They had mental illness and they were medicated for said mental illness. And it took a long time, especially for one of my friends, for them to settle on a medication that worked for him, because the parameters are always different. Everyone is different. You know, there are individual situations that require individual assessment, medication, etc. So I know from talking with that guy that it's really serious stuff. And finding the right meds, and when you find the right meds, sticking to the right meds, is really fucking important stuff. And to be frivolous about it or sort of foolhardy is dangerous. You know, this is someone's mental health that's hanging in the balance. Someone's, you know, their mental well-being and their physical well-being as well that hangs in the balance. And so this piece of shit takes her off the medication that they've settled on, she's been on for 5 years, that's working for her, and puts her on lithium, which apparently is a fucking really dangerous, really strong drug. And he does that at the behest of the management company. Some fucking tards in an office who run a management company. That's who gets to decide how heavily medicated Britney is. And they do that based on how cooperative she is. It's fucking disgusting. It's insane. It's surreal. You wouldn't believe it if there was a movie about it. So she said that she felt drunk when they put her on that lithium. She had to get nurses to monitor her while she was on that medicine. That's how fucking dangerous this gear is. And they just willy-nilly take her off the medication that works and throws her onto this one that's really fucking dangerous, and ends her up, like, leaves her in a vegetative state where she can't, quote-unquote, take up for herself. And that's exactly what the management company want to do. And they do all this, all of this is signed off on by her dad, who's the main conservator and who gets a fucking rake of money from this situation. What a scumbag.
3 days later, after I said no to Vegas, my therapist sat me down in a room and said he had a million phone calls about how I was not cooperating in rehearsals and I haven't been taking my medication. All of this was a false. He immediately the next day put me on lithium out of nowhere. He took me off my normal meds I'd been on for 5 years. And lithium is a very, very strong and completely different medication compared to what I was used to. You can go mentally impaired if you take too much, if you stay on it longer than 5 months. But he put me on that and I felt drunk. I really couldn't even take up for myself.
We spoke before about, it's Jamie Spears, isn't he? He's a deadbeat, always was a fucking two-bit loser who wanted, had no interest in his daughter until she became a cash cow. And then, did what you would expect now, parent to do, he's abusing his daughter. And she says something real weird, like, my dad's been making money off my body for 13 years and I have to be so pretty all the time. And it's just like, when she says it like that, making money off her body for 13 years, she likens her situation to sex trafficking. Because at one point, they say, oh no, you're spinning. Oh, right, here's what happens, right? Over the Christmas holidays, her kids go back to their piece of shit father, Kevin Federline, who's a piece of shit. He's going to have to make amends or whatever with his own conscience at some point, but he's a piece of shit. He saw an opportunity to make a whole load of money out of Britney and feigned, fear or concern for his two sons. He don't give a fuck about his kids. He doesn't. I bet you some other wet nurse has practically raised them while he milks Britney Spears for alimony and fucking all this bullshit. And so over the Christmas period of a couple of weeks, and now again, I should say, to remain somewhat impartial and unbiased, that this is what Britney claims. But I, for one, believe her. And you will have to figure that out for yourself, whether or not you believe her claims. But I believe her claims. And she claims that she was sat down every day for a 2-week period and given a 4-hour psych evaluation every day. 4 hours. And let's just talk about that for a minute. Like, that is almost like some weird interrogation technique that you would see employed by, like, the fucking dirty cops in the name of the father, or fucking waterboarding weirdos in the Middle East, like CIA dickheads. That's the same. Just like you sit down and, like, fucking delve through their whole, give them a fully intense psych test for 4 hours every day. You're going to break that person down. And then they turn around at the end of that 2-week period and say, no, Britney, no. Oh, Britney, you poor sausage. You're crazy. So we're going to send you to a tiny little house where you work 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. You live with your therapist. You live with security. You live with the people you work with. There's no escape from it. Right, we're just going to stuff you in there. It's going to cost $60,000 a month out of your pocket, but that's just the way it has to be, because we're looking after you, because you're a crazy bitch. And it's just like, here it is, here's the confession, sign it. What's the confession? The confession is you're crazy. Oh, no, I'm not crazy. Oh, yeah? 4-hour psych test, you feeling crazy? Like, that sort of stuff would whittle you down. You'd fucking do anything. And like she says at one point, when she agreed to the Vegas residency, that the guy came up in the middle of a show and sort of intimidated and strong-armed her, and she's in a conservatorship and can't even get her own lawyer, and so she just fucking signed the thing. To get out of the uncomfortable, invasive situation she was being put in real time. Like, that's manipulation. That's fucking gaslighting. That whole scenario is gaslighting on a fucking megalithic scale. It's just like, keep telling someone they're crazy till they feel crazy so you can manipulate them. Mental. One thing that's really totally different, we spoke before about there was a level of ambiguity connected to the documentary because she wasn't saying these things. This was all conjecture or whatever. But now she is saying the things. She turned around and said she's not happy, and it's so, there's part of her voice is so raspy. Like, she's got that southern drawl and she's got this raspiness to her voice. Like, what's the chick from The Waterboy? He can do anything he wants. It's got that sort of a rasp to it. I love it. But there's a bit where she's just like, I told everyone I was happy. I told everyone everything is okay. It's not. I'm not happy. And the way she says it, you couldn't listen to that and not believe that girl. Woman, should I say. And the way, so she says that's how things are different. That's sort of dealt with the ambiguity from previous discussions. She also, like, fucking goes after her dad in it. There's a bit where she explains where she cried for an hour before they sent her off to that small house that was going to cost her $60,000 a month to live and work. That she cried on the phone for an hour. And she said, and he loved it.
A phone call from my dad saying, after I did the psych test with this lady, basically saying I had failed the test or whatever. I'm sorry, Britney, you have to listen to your doctors. They are planning to send you to a small home in Beverly Hills to do a small rehab program that we're going to make up for you. You're going to pay $60,000 a month for this. I cried on the phone for an hour and he loved every minute of it. The control he had over someone as powerful as me, as he loved the control to hurt his own daughter 100,000%, he loved it.
He loved it. And there's other weird ways in which she talks about him that you really get to see a snapshot into what she feels, what she thinks about this guy. Her own father, he's a scumbag. He's a scumbag, a lowlife, and she knows it. And there's a weird sort of sexual thing about it, even though when like I said, oh my, I gotta keep my, he made money off my body for 13 years and I had to be so pretty the whole time.
But my precious body, who's worked for my dad for the past fucking 13 years, trying to be so good and pretty, so perfect when he works me so hard, when I do everything I'm told in the state of California, allowed my ignorant father to take his own daughter.
Yeah, it's mental. It's almost like she's basically a slave. Like there's this weird modern day, it's sort of like a weird modern day version of that classic story of like the starlet who was practically owned by the film company, you know what I mean, and shipped around and you know, made to undergo surgery and dyed her hair and all this sort of weird, almost LA Confidential vibe to it, sort of modern days thing. But how the fuck is this happening? How the fuck is a woman being sort of held captive almost in Hollywood, in LA, and being forced to perform and record and all this other weird shit and not be allowed to have any of the money? She's not even allowed to go for in the car with her boyfriend. If they decide that she can't go on that holiday to Maui, then she's not going. You know, like she has an IED bar or whatever, a contraceptive bar in her arm that she's not allowed to get removed. Like, that's body autonomy shit. And it's a management company, a Los Angeles fucking talent agency is dictating this stuff to the woman. You know what I mean? And she said how she was unhappy. She also turned around and said she's traumatized from the situation. Fucking right, she's traumatized from the situation. She's been living in a nightmare for 13 years. She's talking about suing her family for putting her through this stuff. And when she says it, she's like, you know, and I said before, she's not happy. And she said it was always fake it to make it. But I'm not happy. I'm traumatized. And you're just like, whoa. It's Britney fucking Spears. How did this happen? How did this happen? And how is it still allowed to happen? How is it after that testimony we heard last week still happening? She makes a beautiful point throughout the whole testimony where she says, I employ hundreds of people. The livelihoods of hundreds of people depend on me and my whereabouts. She's like, I'm not good, I'm great. I am great at what I do. Between tour managers, roadies, backing dancers, bus drivers, caterers, etc., etc. There are literally, like she said, hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on her whereabouts. So how could the state of California have her with the whereabouts that she has, the capabilities to, you know, generate money for hundreds of people? How could the state of California have her in a conservatorship? She's obviously of sound mind and body, or she wouldn't be able to fucking work.
Ma'am, I didn't know I could petition the conservatorship to end it. I'm sorry for my ignorance, but I honestly didn't know that. It's been a long time since I've owned my money, and it's my wish and my dream for all of this to end without being tested. Again, it makes no sense whatsoever for the state of California to sit back and literally watch me with their own two eyes make a living for so many people and pay so many people trucks and buses on tour on the road with me and be told I'm not good enough. But I'm great at what I do. And I allow these people to control what I do, ma'am, and it's enough. It makes no sense at all.
She wouldn't be able to create revenue for all of these people if she was meant to be in a conservatorship, if she had the same sort of mental incapacitation that most people in a conservatorship have. And the other mental thing is she didn't know she could petition it herself. She didn't know, and she says it. And she says, excuse my ignorance, Your Honor. She just didn't know. If it became a situation where socially and therefore probably financially it was bad to be involved in the conservatorship so far as the enforcing of the conservatorship, if that became socially a no-no, a taboo, and by default people stopped engaging, well then that would be a great situation for Britney Spears, but I do think it's going to end badly for the likes of her father and anyone else who was involved in the situation, took advantage. Obviously, I'm pretty sure that the testimony she gave was not actually a petition, and no matter what, she has to file a petition to the conservatorship, which no doubt she's now going to do. And I'm assuming that she will just be released from the conservatorship straight away, because of the aforementioned situation where she has the whereabouts and the wherewithal to create a revenue stream for hundreds of people, and by default could not be incapacitated to the point of conservatorship. And so that's going to be interesting, isn't it? If she gets out of it and where she goes from there, because she said she also wanted to tell her story. She doesn't want to be gagged anymore. She doesn't want the people who perpetrated these abuses, and that's what they are, on her, to get away with it, at least in a social footing. She wants everyone to know what these people did. And so, with all of that, I hope you've enjoyed our little recap episode today. Hopefully Britney gets out of her conservatorship. Hopefully we get through the next sort of stage of coronavirus restrictions without tearing each other apart. And hopefully our government will stop throwing us under the bus and start looking out for our best interests. Hopefully. I hope all of those things happen. In the meantime, I also hope that everyone is happy, that they're loving themselves. I'm going to try and love myself. I'm going to try and be the truth. And that's it.
Take another photograph and document a life that's right. And ways consist of simple things, the days of black and white. And faces from a humble past at one with the ground.